This week, I'm going to sit down with South Texas-based photographer and fellow YouTuber Eli Infante to talk about high-speed sync portraiture and teaching photography. Stay tuned.
You're watching TOGCHAT Live, the only live show dedicated to the hows and whys behind creating consistently great photographs. Here's your host, Joe Edelman.
Hey gang, welcome to episode number 230 of TOGCHAT, the only live show with a focus on the hows and whys behind making consistently great photographs. And for the next 60 minutes, I'm here to help you improve your photography. I'm proud to say that this episode of TOGCHAT Live is sponsored by Imaging USA 2021, which is hosted by the Professional Photographers of America. Imaging USA will be streaming live and on demand January 17th through the 19th so that photographers from all around the world can attend. I have a link in the show notes so that you can register and attend the conference for just $59. Already, gang, we've got photographers checking in from all over the world, one of my favorite parts of TOGCHAT. So please be sure to check in, leave a comment for me, and let me know you're here and where you are in the world. It's always so cool to see so many people from so many countries tuning into TOGCHAT and talk about their love of photography. And we've got, let's see here, Lynn, of course, from New York. Susan's here from Philadelphia. A very snowy day indeed, Susan. We got Charlie here. Gosh, I don't remember where Charlie's from, but Charlie told me at some point. Lawrence is here from Thursday in the Philippines. How you doing, Lawrence? I've got Steve in Frederick, Maryland. Ruben also down in Maryland. John out in Harrisburg. And we've got Mitch in Northern Ireland. Ken in the UK. Nick in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. It is awesome to see you guys. Dragos is here from Amsterdam. It's always so cool to see how many people are here. I do hope that you are all healthy and safe and, of course, still wearing a mask, practicing your social distancing. Before we dig in, understand that I'm going to work really hard to help you with your photography in the next 60 minutes. It would help a lot more people to find my channel and TOGCHAT if you could do me a solid, hit that thumbs up. It's right down there below the video. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube will recommend the show to other photographers. And while you're down there, feel free to hit that share button to let your photography friends know that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. Or you can just go ahead and share the link, tog.chat/live. I just dropped it in the chat window for you. Twitter, Facebook, they're the fastest way to get the word out. And of course, if you're a member of any photography clubs or groups, please let them know about TOGCHAT. Don't keep it all to yourself. And gang, I know it's fun to chat, but we've got a lot to talk about tonight. I'm going to ask you to save the chat for questions, not discussions. That way you don't miss any great tips that I may help you improve your photography with, and I'm not going to miss any of your questions in the chat noise. And please do remember, TOGCHAT is available for download as a podcast every week. In fact, I'll share the link for you in the chat right now. You can also find it in the show notes. Podcast is a great way to get your weekly fix while you're editing or retouching. Or if you live in the Northeastern United States like I do, it's great to listen to while you are shoveling out of the 2 feet of snow that is falling right now. The show is available on iTunes, Google, Spotify, Amazon, all the major podcast platforms. I post the podcast a few hours after the end of the live show each week. And that brings me to tonight's feature. I have an awesome interview for you with South Texas-based photographer and high-speed sync master and fellow YouTuber Eli Infante. Now, I'm going to play the first 25 minutes of the interview for you here on YouTube. And then the full unedited interview will be available for download as part of the podcast a little later this evening. Make sure you check it out. Eli was awesome to talk to. He shared some incredibly great ideas and tips. You don't want to miss them. I also want you to be sure that you check out Eli's website and YouTube channel. The links are in the show notes. So let's get right into it. Here he is. Eli, it is great to have you as my guest on TOGCHAT Live. How are you, sir? It's great to finally talk to you.
Likewise, Joe. Thank you so much, man. I've been a big fan of TOGCHAT. I've been watching it for the past 2 or 3 years, and I remember every Wednesday I would be cooking dinner and be listening to TOGCHAT. So it's kind of surreal to finally be on the show. So thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. So since you are new to my audience, or at least some of my audience, tell me a little bit about Eli. Kind of introduce yourself to folks. Let them know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So I'm a portrait photographer based in South Texas. I would say that I'm more of an educator. So I've been in the education profession for over 10 years. I teach photography and audio video production in high school. And I'm also a Westcott Top Pro. I just became a Westcott Top Pro a few months ago, sorry. So yeah.
Very cool. So Eli, I want to get right into it because I know that I have a lot of viewers who are convinced that I hate high-speed sync. So I want to start there, and we'll bounce around a lot because I want to learn more about you, and especially the fact that you teach high school students. That's a big thing for me. So you first showed up on my radar probably a little bit over a year ago, right after I went on a rant on TOGCHAT about photographers using high-speed sync, for outdoor portraits. And I pointed out that part of the challenge with that whole, shall we say, style, is that it was a really, really big trend. And there were really only a few photographers who sincerely do it really, really well. And because it's a trend, everyone else is just kind of chasing it like a zombie and ultimately not doing it very well. You, sir, are one of the guys who really has it down to a science and creates truly visually stunning images. One thing that's very clear, your high-speed sync portraits, they've got a very definitive style to them. So what I'd love to know first is, how did high-speed sync for portraits come to be that style? I mean, I know that you've recently started to rethink your technique a little bit and kind of want to push yourself in some different directions, and we'll get to that. But how did you, stumble into this technique or decide to make it your working style?
So it's actually a funny story. So about 4 years ago, it was at a photography meetup. This is when I was barely learning portrait photography. I started off, of course, natural light. And I did a workshop with a photographer, local photographer. His name was Daryl. And he had put on Facebook, he was like, hey, we're going to do a meetup. And at that time, I was like, man, I need some more photography friends. I want to hang out with some more people. So I decided to go, and only 3 people were there. It was me, Daryl, and another photographer named Francisco Hernandez. And so Francisco was there, and I remember he had the strobe light. I think at that time it was either the Rove light or the Alien Bees. And so he's doing high-speed sync, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And I was just blown away. I was like, I've always wanted to do that. I remember getting my Alien Bees, being outside and cranking up the shutter speed really high. And I'm like, how come I'm not seeing the flash? Because of the flash sync speed, of course, right? And this is before YouTube was like a big thing where you could learn all this stuff. Everything was online or through magazines. And so I was introduced to it by Francisco Hernandez. And when I got introduced to it, I was completely, blown away. And of course, 4 years ago, when high-speed sync was barely being introduced, not that many people were doing it. So at that time, when you were shooting, a lot of people were kind of blown away as to, how are you going above the sync speed? And that's when it kind of just became real popular. Once, especially with the Godox lights coming out, and people were being being affordable. And so that's how it kind of started with the high speed sync, and I remember when I first started, I was doing that crazy bokeh look, the 135 f2, the 85 1.4. So I did about 2 years of that, of just model stand right in the middle. And I talk about that in the video that you saw, stand right in the middle, do a simple little pose, and then just blur out the background. And then I started growing into other lenses, and I started developing my style, where eventually I got into, and I found my favorite lens, which is the 35, which includes more environment. And going back to what you were saying about how my style is a little bit different with the high speed sync, and I would credit that a lot to the 35 because it's a little bit more of a storytelling lens. And so, yeah.
Cool. So speaking of that video, in the recent video, you mentioned 3 portrait mistakes that have helped you improve your photography. And one of the things you talked about, which it's almost blasphemous for people that swear by high-speed sync, was the idea of relying on bokeh and telephoto lenses, to create high-speed sync portraits. Explain a little bit more about like what got you to that point. And I'm curious, now that you've kind of created this new awareness of it, is it maybe at least temporarily like off limits, or is it more a matter of just really limiting how much you do it? And or even for that matter, do you still tend to do it sometimes, but what's changed in the way that you do it?
I think that what's changed is that I'm looking for more compositional elements in the photograph, because I feel like when you're blurring out the background so much, you're basically blurring out the possibility of getting some creative, concepts with the composition. And so I felt like I was being lazy with time. It was more of, I'm just going to blur it out because I really don't know anything about composition. And you know what's funny, Joe? When I released that video, I had like 3 or 4 friends message me and they were like, Eli, are you calling me out? I felt like you were calling me out. And people were kind of like, they weren't mad at me, but they were like, dang, dude, like you made some really great points. Because I think when people, buy lenses, they buy it with the impression of, I'm going to shoot at 1.2 if I buy a 1.2 lens. And that's it. And you know what's funny is that I'm actually using the Sigma 1.2 lens. They sent me a rental and I'm using it, but I don't find myself shooting at 1.2 very often. I go to like 2.2, 2.8. But going back to what you're saying about the change of like the blurred out background, I just felt like I wanted to challenge myself. And I think a lot of it was, I recently just got a studio. And the fact that now I'm in the studio, I think that has really opened up my eyes to, like, I really don't know lighting as much as I thought I did. Because with high speed sync, I found myself always positioning the light at 45 degrees Rembrandt lighting. And what was bothering me, and I was just kind of like, you know what, Eli, like there has to be more than just doing that all the time, And I was using the same modifiers. And lately I've actually been getting into the umbrellas. And I'm really finding how awesome the umbrellas can be.
Isn't it amazing what you can do with a simple umbrella?
Yes. And so I think that the studio is what's really opened up my eyes and really brought a sense of reality to my work, because I was teaching workshops in Houston, in San Antonio, and I was telling my friends, I was like, hey guys, like it's cool that we're doing these high-speed sync workshops, but we're going to have to evolve. We can't just expect to just keep teaching workshops and then just tell people, okay, just position the light 45 degrees Rembrandt and then just blur out the background. Like what's going to happen next year, in 2 years from now, 3 years from now? You have to keep evolving with the industry. You can't just stay stuck with, doing the same thing. At least that's the way I approach it.
No, I would agree. I mean, for me, I take it even to a personal level. If you essentially get yourself in this groove where like, this is the way I do it, and you always do it the same way, it actually just becomes kind of boring. Even if you're doing excellent work, the act of doing it. So I'm not even talking about people looking at it. I'm talking about me doing it. It becomes kind of boring because it's almost like I know the outcome before I even start the process.
Yeah. And you know what, Joe, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Like I felt like I wasn't challenging myself enough. You know what I mean? And you know what's funny? I had this mindset that I only liked soft light and that I didn't like hard light. And you know what the real answer was, Joe? Is that it's not that I didn't like hard light. It's just I didn't know how to use hard light. So there's the difference when, I hear some photographer say, oh, hard light sucks. And it's like, not that it sucks. You just don't know how to use it. You know what I mean? And that's what was happening to me. I didn't know how to use it at all. I find myself trying these new things and my brain kind of goes through this little panic mode of like, oh my gosh, what happened to the soft light look? What happened to the bokeh look? And my brain wants to just, like, if I try something new, my brain will be like, don't do that anymore. That's wrong. Go back to your old style. And I've been forcing myself in the studio to say, nope, you're going to sit there and you're going to keep working it and you're going to figure out what the problem was. And one of the biggest processes in my work, and I get a lot of messages from people. It's like, Eli, how did you just grow so much within the past year or two? And what I do is I have a journal. I write down after, most of the photo shoots, I write down what was going on through my process. Like, what didn't I like during the shoot? And how could I improve? Where did I find myself stuck? And I feel like the reflections is what's really helping me improve, because sometimes I'll even look at it before a photo shoot and remind myself, like, Eli, you didn't communicate as much to the model as you could have, or maybe the pose wasn't as good. And I'm not even talking about a technical standpoint. I'm talking about just small details that, can make the photo shoot come out a lot better.
So, okay, wow. So two things now. So first of all, I have to say, and I say this with respect, you are not normal. So the fact that you're doing the journaling is awesome. I mean, literally awesome. One of the things I talk about, which doesn't even rise to that level, is I try to encourage photographers to take time from, every so often and go back and look at their old shots, not the ones they like. Not everybody says do that. I mean, like, okay, I did a shot the other day. I picked out the 3 or 4 images that I liked. I did the prep. I delivered them. I put them on social media. Everybody's happy. But those 3 or 4 images, there were a whole bunch of others that we shot that day that we didn't use, that we didn't like. And just by going back and working through those images and asking the simple question, why? Why don't I like this shot? What could I have done differently? What could I have done better? You're taking it literally to a whole new level, which honestly is awesome. I'm sure you can understand, working as an educator, I don't care what the age group is, trying to get people to put in that much additional effort is a challenge. But, you're firsthand, you're seeing the difference that it makes. So I also wanted to ask you about, you talked about kind of not necessarily switching, but finding yourself using the wide angle more.
Yes.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you'll agree. And I want you to expand on what your experience was. Didn't you also notice that as soon as you started taking out that wide angle, that maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but basically realizing how much additional potential you had to tell a story in a shot, to create compositional elements in a shot? Like it really forces you actually, and again, I don't want to shut up then because I want your words, but it forces you to actually start to pay attention to much more detail. Did you go through that transition?
Oh man, absolutely. I mean, that's honestly, I felt like, Joe, that's when photography started to become fun. When I used that 35, that's when I started introducing props and I could do full body shots. And man, just the fact that I can include the environment, like if you look at my old work, 135 compared to the 35, you'll see a completely different style. You'll start noticing that that's when I started finding like old abandoned locations. That's just kind of like my style. Like if I see something that's all textured and all beat up, like that's what excites me. I'm like, I don't want to blur out that beautiful texture and that broken down door. I want to include all that, and so I wanted to shoot at 2.8. And of course you can still get bokeh at 2.8, but compared to like a 135, 1.8, man, like that's just really, what really drove my work. And the 35 was a big factor. Even the 28 to 75 Tamron, I've taken some of my favorite shots. And I think I sent you one, Joe, with a girl kind of sitting down with her arm down in an abandoned little warehouse. Oh man, it's like still to this day, it's one of my favorite shots.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. So if you don't mind, and obviously I'm going to share the links to your YouTube channel and that, so I definitely want folks to check that out. But can you walk me through a little bit of your older process in terms of with the high speed sync? I have a way that I always describe getting the exposure right, but you're a master at it. I hardly ever use the technique. And in fact, I've never done high-speed sync in my life, but overpowering the sun, doing that type of outdoor studio look that you do. Yes, I mean, we used to do that back in the 70s before the high-speed sync was available. Wasn't quite as easy, wasn't quite as fast, but we could do it. So what are your steps in terms of, I'm assuming figuring out your exposure for your ambient first and then bringing your light in.
Yes.
I do recall in your video, you talk for a while, you always went with your light in one specific location. Can you walk me through that a little bit?
So the way my process, and I'm glad you brought up this question. It's a great question, Joe. So one of my biggest mistakes first was always just looking for where the sun was at. I was like, okay, where's the sun? Like I need the sun to add that rim, like that second light. And lately now, within the past year, another change that I've done with the high-speed sync is now I'm like, I don't even care about the light. I tell my friend and my assistants, I'm like, guys, don't even talk to me about the light right now. I want to just look at where the light is. I want to see my composition. And I always tell them that they always try to tell me, like, where do I want the light? I'm like, nope, don't even ask me that right now. I'm putting my viewfinder. I'm looking at what I want to get first. What's going to make more sense? Keeping the light in the same direction as the sun to keep it more natural? Or do I want that sun rim light? And so I've slowed down my process a lot more. And I'll even tell my subject, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just, put my eye to the lens and I'm going to see if this composition's even good. Back in the day, I would just get nervous and I'm like, no, we're just going to do it right here. We're just going to just shoot it. We're just going to get it done. Now it's like, no, we're taking our time and we're really looking at, okay, what's going on in the background exposure and where do I want the light position? So the light now is the last ingredient in my photograph. It's composition and what pose is going to make sense in that environment.
So let me ask you about something you just said, and it's an experience that I think a lot of photographers have and they struggle dealing with. You talked about when you first started this, you were nervous. So it's like, nope, we're going to work right here. Yes. I'm going to set my light. I have my way of doing it. But then you talked about how you do it now, but you didn't say you're nervous anymore. So what was that evolution and how did that happen?
Okay. You're going to love this answer, Joe. It's not the most beautiful answer that people want to hear, but it's practice, shooting 3 to 4 times a week. Just even if you don't even have a model, like me and my friend right now, one of my best friends, Marco, we'll go to the studio. We don't have a subject. We'll just be the subjects. We'll just photograph each other. And I've been telling him, I was like, dude, right now, I just want to deliberate practice. Like, let's just go out and shoot. We don't need anybody. Let's just see what the light's doing. Let's get comfortable with the light, because I just had a studio shoot maybe about 2 weeks ago, and I was upset with myself. I bought this new modifier. It's a projector. And so I bought it, I used it, I practiced with it, and I didn't practice with it for about a month. So I busted out finally without practicing for a month. I try it out, I set it up, and I'm like, my brain's like, I don't know what's going on. Like, why isn't it working the way it is? It's because I hadn't practiced in a month. So I was struggling. And so I got mad. So the next day after my reflection, I was like, I'm going to go back to the studio. And guess what? You're going to, for the next 2 or 3 days, you're going to practice with that thing and you're going to nail it down, because it wasn't the subject's fault. It wasn't the lighting's fault. It was my inability and my practice. And so that was all on me, on why I wasn't getting the shot the way I wanted.
Folks, I want to point out, this man teaches high school students. He has a day job. So that 4 days a week that he's shooting, it's a matter of, is it a priority or not? If it's a priority, you make the time and, you put in the effort. I'm curious, though, about your projector. Tell me about your projector.
So it is a Pixum Pro. I imported it from Europe. So it has a 50 millimeter Canon lens. So it has a manual focus lens on it. It's a Bowens mount. And so it has these gobos that I can use.
So it's similar to a spiffy gear light blaster kind of concept.
Yes.
Got it. Cool.
So I kind of want to play around with that and see where maybe I can get some creative stuff. But going back to saying where I'm different, this is going to piss off a lot of people. My friends always make fun of me. I wake up, so I don't go to work until like 7 o'clock. I wake up at 4:30 every morning, so I can have like an hour and a half to edit photographs. And then I drive to work, and I get to work like maybe 30 minutes, an hour or so. Because Joe, look, like you said, I have a full-time job. I'm a full-time teacher, and everybody always tells me, like, oh, you have such an awesome job. Like, you teach photography. Like, yes, it's cool. I love it. But it takes up a lot of my time. Being a teacher, you have a lot of work, like lesson plans, grading. Like, there's not a lot of time. And the only thing that I can take control of is my mornings, because after work, something might come up with my girlfriend, something might come up with family. I might have a meeting. So if I want to get editing done, it has to get done in the morning when it's quiet, nobody's bothering me. And that hour and a half, Joe, is the time where I get most of my work done. I can get like 10 times more work done in that hour and a half than I can when I get home from work, because there's so many things going on.
So in the same video we've been talking about the 3 mistakes, you talked about slowing down when shooting, and you've mentioned it in our conversation. So I can certainly think of some ways, because that's a problem that I've dealt with my whole career, is needing to slow down. So 2 things. One, how has that helped you? And then the other key one is, what did you change in your process to help you slow down? Because if I'm not mistaken, you don't tether when you shoot, do you?
Okay, absolutely not.
How did it help you, and what did you change?
So it helped in the sense of, like, it really helped my composition, but also just looking for light. I think that's the big thing now, is I'm not looking for light in the same way as I used to. Like I said, I always used to look for it in the rim light. Now I'm looking for, light bouncing off walls. I'm looking for light that's creating shapes. I'm looking for light where I can maybe add some color. So lately I've been doing a lot of shots where the light is kind of beaming off a wall. And I've got a couple of like 3 or 4 shots with that. But also being able to analyze the picture. I've been adding a lot of ambient color now with the second light. So I've been using the Westcott FJ400 with the magnetic reflector. I have a couple of shots. Actually, I just did one, Joe. I don't know if I sent you the picture, but I did one in a coffee shop shoot. And so I'm taking that shot and I'm looking at the background as I'm taking the shot. I'm like, man, it's really dark, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to color grade that. The background, like it's kind of not serving a purpose. So I decided to add a light shooting up at the ceiling to just add this kind of background light. And I got that idea because I watched a lot of like workshops and stuff online. One of my photographers I've been watching a lot is Jonathan Thorpe. And so he does that a lot in his portrait work. So the slowing down process kind of allows me to analyze, okay, what else can I add to this photograph to kind of make it like a final piece? Because I think one of the biggest frustrations is after I'm done with the photo shoot, I start looking at the pictures and I'm like, damn, if I just slow down, I could have caught that and I could have made the picture just a little bit better. Like I'm my biggest critic. A lot of people can tell me off on Instagram and YouTube, but there's no harsher critic than myself. Like my friend Marco will tell you, like we're driving back from a shoot and I'm just like, dang, like I should have just moved the light just a little bit closer. I'm like, man, I should have just, maybe added a colored gel there, And so slowing down allows me to kind of just see things that I can maybe possibly add to kind of get the final, awesome photograph that I'm trying to achieve.
I realize you are in the process of kind of evolving, like consciously evolving your style and your techniques right now. But you talk quite a bit in a few of the videos that I've watched. You talk about a style, and that's an area where you and I differ a little bit. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. I'm kind of a little bit more of don't think about your style, let your style find you. Especially hearing how much time and effort you put into really kind of honestly being very thoughtful and kind of present to what you're doing. I completely understand why that's an important thing for you. But if you had to put words to it, how would you describe your style of portraiture?
Ooh, man. So my style, I mean, of course it has that high-speed sync look, but I would say my style is more of the editorial kind of grungy kind of abandoned feel. Like if you're going to tell me, Eli, I want you to go figure out a photo shoot right now, the first thing I'd be thinking about is the wardrobe. I'm going to think wardrobe that's going to go with that abandoned location, whether it's an old vehicle, whether it's an old warehouse, whether it's an abandoned like it's funny, Joe, like in 2019 I found in this road here where I live, it had like 3 abandoned locations, and those 3 locations is what kind of developed my look, I guess you could say, my style, because it offered all of that nice texture. That's another thing that I look for is texture in my photographs.
Are you pretty much self-taught in photography? Did you go to school in photography? How did you kind of get to this point with?
Man, that's a good question. So I would say I'm about maybe 90% self-taught, 10% in school. So my first class I ever took was at University of Texas Pan American. And I took a film class. So I did a film class there. It was black and white photography. We developed the film. We did the photographs. Super awesome. One of my favorite experiences of all time. I missed the studio, the developing and all that stuff. And then yeah, most of it was with books. I remember one of my first books that I ever read was from Scott Kelby before YouTube was a thing. And so most of my stuff is through books, through YouTube, or not really YouTube, but a lot of resources that I've purchased online. And then of course a little bit of YouTube, but I think the best thing in order to learn that I found is practice. Nothing beats that. Of course it's great to use books. It's great to use the YouTube stuff, but when you can actually just practice yourself, I think that's the biggest help, at least in my opinion. If you want quick improvements, go out there and do it.
Cool. So I want to change gears a little bit and talk about high school and high school kids. And part of the reason why I'm so interested in that is it was actually junior high and high school that really set me on my path to becoming a photographer. And I was fortunate. I had some teachers that were very supportive and really kind of opened some doors for me. So I've got a couple questions, but the first one um, for the benefit of your students, your current students, what I really want to know is, what does it take to get a good grade for Mr. Infante? And that is where I'm going to leave you hanging, because I really want you to hear the entire interview. As I mentioned earlier, the podcast goes live around 10 p.m. Eastern Time in the US tonight. So it's a couple hours, and you'll be able to find it at tog.chat/podcast. I'll put the link in the chat window for you. It's also in the show notes. I promise you, you don't want to miss the rest of the interview. There's still lots of great stuff to come. Eli was awesome to talk with, shared a lot of really, really great information for you guys. Now, my photo notes for the week. Tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time in the US, I will be presenting a 1-hour free online and interactive presentation called Photography Critiques Suck. Learn the best way to get useful feedback on your photography. And did I mention it's free? I just dropped the registration link in the chat window for you. And of course, you can find it in the show notes below. Now, I mentioned at the top of the show, this episode is sponsored by Imaging USA 2021. If you haven't registered to attend, now is the time to do it. It's the end of the year. The holidays are on top of us. Everybody's busy. Don't miss out on this incredible learning opportunity that is just over a month away. Imaging USA is going to take place on January 17th through the 19th, and it's all online, which means that you can attend it from anywhere in the world, and the registration is only $59. If you're a new member of PPA, or if you join now, you can attend Imaging USA 2021 for free. Don't pass that offer up. If you haven't heard me talk about Imaging USA in the past, it is the world's largest photography convention and expo. And in 2021, you can experience its 3 days of live education and on-demand classes right from wherever you are. There's no need for hotel reservations, no travel plans, no need for luggage. All you need is a computer with an internet connection and a solid selection of snacks if you're like me. You can even replay the classes and revisit the expo through January 31st to be sure that you're getting all the information and all the inspiration that you need. The link, it's in the show notes. Check it out. All right, gang. So how can I help you with your photography tonight? You're here. There's got to be something that you want to improve with your photography. I do have a couple of questions that came in early from my Facebook group. If you haven't joined the groups yet, it doesn't cost you anything. Links are in the show notes. Check them out. So the first question that I've got here comes in from Steve Wilking, and let me just get that loaded. There we go. So it's a 3-parter. Steve went for it tonight, okay? Part 1, how do you know when you've over-sharpened or under-sharpened an image? Part 2, what is the relationship between sharpening, clarity, and texture? And then part 3, do you sharpen an image differently based on the size of the image? Whew, okay. So ultimately, this would be like a masterclass session to answer all 3 of these properly, Steve, but I want to try and at least give you a start here. So I'm going to start with the middle one first. What is the relationship between sharpening, clarity, and texture? So understand that sharpening is kind of an item on its own, and I'll show you some things about sharpening in a second, but let's do clarity and texture. Clarity is a stronger control than texture, and that's a good thing. Texture is more subtle, and every now and then you need something that's a little bit stronger. That's where clarity comes in. Texture is intended for enhancing or diminishing small details and the apparent sharpness in your images, with minimal halos or some of the other drawbacks that you get if you go a little heavy on the clarity. For me also, I find that it tends, when I'm using a texture tool, to add just ever so slight a bit of saturation. So every now and then I have to dial my saturation back just a tad if I'm adding a lot of texture. Now, clarity works a little bit better when you're looking for larger areas of impact. And it's definitely going to change the luminance and the saturation more than texture does. Texture is best for making subtle adjustments to generally mid-frequency, mid-tonal features. Clarity is best for making stronger adjustments to a much broader frequency range, meaning pretty much the whole image, because it's also going to grab some of the lower frequencies, right? We frequently hear people explain that clarity works best by increasing the mid-tone contrast. That is a fact. But to stop there is kind of oversimplifying what the tool does, and that's why I say this is kind of a master class topic. Understand that clarity has a big impact on the sharpness, but it's more of a perceived sharpness, because if you overdo it, and even slightly overdo it, clarity is going to cause that kind of halo effect that really degrades your image. So for me, I mean, I use all three of the tools. In the case of texture and clarity, I tend to use them locally, which you can do in Lightroom or Photoshop. In Lightroom, you're going to do it with adjustment brushes. In Photoshop, you're going to do it with masking. That's how I approach it, right? Now, with regards to sharpening, and you asked, do you sharpen an image differently based on the size of the image? Well, for me, it's not so much about the size of the image. In fact, I'm just going to take your question off the screen here for a second. It's not so much about the size of the image as it is where the image is going. So now I'm going to forewarn all of you. I'm about to put a screen catcher up here that, if all of you know how to do a screenshot, because a lot of you are going to say, oh, I want those numbers. I want those numbers. So I'm warning you in advance. Make the video big on your screen and get ready to take a screen capture. I'm not going to type them into chat later, because once the screen capture goes away, I'm not going to lie to you, I won't remember the numbers. I'm being completely honest. So you want to do a screen capture. Otherwise, you need to wait for me to do my live presentation about the secret powers of RAW, and then you'll get to see this. So here, Steve, is how I approach sharpening. So I basically have three categories: web, detailed, and normal. So web is pretty obvious, so let's leave that one for last. Detailed tends to be if I really feel the image needs a little bit of a bump, and in all likelihood, if I'm going to print the image. And normal would be the output sharpening that I would do if I am sending an image off to a client for reproduction. Now, a couple of things about the three choices here, right? This is output sharpening, meaning it is the very last thing that I do when I am working on my images before I send the images to the internet, to the printer, to the client. So that's not sharpening that I'm doing early on. It's not sharpening that I'm doing in the beginning. Also, for those of you that did do the screen capture and grab those numbers, feel free to use them, but please understand something. When we talk about sharpening for images, it's kind of like what you hear when you watch the cooking shows. I know, what does cooking have to do with photography? I'm not much of a cook, but my wife likes to watch those cooking shows, and when she does, I always hear the chefs putting seasoning in the pot and saying flavor to taste. And basically what they're saying is there's no right or wrong amount of seasoning. It's about your preferences. So those numbers that I gave you, use them as starting points. Use them as a recommendation. I use those numbers as my starting points. Frequently, they may be a little bit too aggressive, so then I will dial them back a little bit. Frequently, they may be not enough sharpening, and I will increase them a little bit. So depending on the program you use, there are different ways to do it. I work in Photoshop. That's always where I'm at when I'm getting ready to output. So for me, I can run those numbers as an action. I have 3 actions saved. So I pick the one that I'm going to use. I hit the shortcut key. And then if it's a little too aggressive, all I have to do is go up to image, edit, and then fade sharpening just a little bit. But again, flavor to taste. I don't want you to take those numbers and think, Joe uses them, they're right. That's the perfect number. No, they are ideal for me, for my taste, for my images. And then, Steve, you also had another question in there that, let me just get that back on the screen. How do you know when you've over sharpened or kind of under sharpened? that also fits into the flavor to taste thing, right? Um, for me, if I'm seeing halos around my subjects and the color is getting gritty, in fact, even if it's a situation where it's almost starting to look like I've added grain or noise to my image, then I've probably over sharpened it. Okay. So those are all things to consider. And then you also asked about, do you do it basic or differently based on the image size? Um, kind of. So keep in mind, an image that's going to the web, part of the reason why, if you look at those numbers that I gave you, they're not as aggressive as like the detailed settings. That's because an image that's going to the web should only be 72 dpi and it shouldn't be huge. There's no benefit to that. In fact, if you're going to put it on social media, gang, please don't upload full resolution images to social media, because the social media platforms, they're going to compress your JPEGs. So they're going to take a compressed file and they are going to compress it even further, which means there is a loss of quality. You are not gaining anything by loading a full res file to a social media website. So a lot to think about. Sounds like you need to do a little bit more research, Steve. I see your comment there. You'll be hitting me up in the mentoring group. Steve is part of my mentoring group, which, by the way, you guys, you can join the mentoring group for $5 a month. It gives you direct access to me via messaging and the ability to ask me questions, to get advice. And then once a week, we also do video meetups where you can also get help from the entire group. We go over all kind of really cool stuff. So check it out. There's a link down in the description that you can follow to learn a little bit more about it. Okay. And I had another question here that came in early tonight in my group. This one's from Jason. He's asking, to achieve better sunset or sunrise photos and like moving water shots. So we're talking kind of nature, landscape things. Should I use ND filters or does software do the trick in editing? Jason, for the stuff that you're describing, sunset, sunrise, moving water, an ND filter actually isn't a huge benefit. I would be more inclined to either, at least at a minimum, use a basic UV filter depending on the scene, because it's going to knock out some of the UV haze. But you would probably gain a lot more benefit by using a polarizing filter, because a polarizing filter is going to allow you to make adjustments. A neutral density filter is just that, it's density. So it's impacting the amount of light that's passing through. So there's really not software that's going to make a particularly big difference there. I mean, yes, with Photoshop now, we have the dehaze filter, and the dehaze filter in Photoshop is quite impressive, but there's no substitute for trying to knock out as much of that haze as you possibly can when you do the shot. But a neutral density filter is really not necessarily going to be the answer for that. So that would kind of be my approach there. All right, gang. So I'm going to scroll back here. I saw a couple questions come in earlier. We don't have a lot of questions in here, gang. So how can I help you? Put some questions in. Let's chat. We still got 20 minutes, and you know I always go overtime, right? Okay, so scrolling back, where did I see my first questions come in? Where was it? Where was it? There we go. From FN89. I think this is like one of my favorite usernames that shows up at TOGCHAT here. What is the camera that you're using for streaming? I have an EM1 Mark II, but I noticed that it gets hot. So a couple of things. First of all, almost any camera that you use, and when I say almost any camera, actually, I should probably rephrase that and say every camera that you use is going to heat up for two reasons. When you're running a camera that long, you've got a computer processor that's running nonstop, just like in your computer, which gets warm in the camera. Also, the sensor is going to generate some heat in and of itself, and your image quality can be impacted by that heat. That's really what you have to worry about. So I currently, FN89, only for my live streaming, I use a Blackmagic Pocket Design 4K camera, which is also a Micro Four Thirds camera. And I use it basically because it is designed for television production type stuff on a budget. I mean, obviously, it's not as expensive as a full-blown TV camera, but I am able to control color, contrast, density, auto, and everything from that camera on a piece of software that's sitting on my computer here. So I don't have to get to the camera. I don't have to run around and make adjustments on the camera. I can basically control everything on the camera right here in a piece of software. That's the benefit to doing it. For probably 3 years, best part of 3 years, I used the EM1 Mark II to do my live streaming. In fact, right now, that's an EM1 Mark II that you're viewing me through right there. They work absolutely fine. I did have one instance in all the time that I used that camera for live streaming where I had hit about the 4.5 hour mark that the camera had been on with the HDMI feed out, and it shut down. It decided too hot, done, and it shut down. So the good part of it is the camera basically reaches a temperature point and it says, that's it, I've got to shut down to cool off. Now, of course, you don't want that to happen in the middle of a live feed. And it did indeed happen to me in the middle of streaming something. Fortunately, I had another camera set up. I was able to make the switch, but you're generally not going to need 4 hours of streaming time. And if you do, then yes, and honestly, that answer would apply to pretty much any mirrorless camera that's actually primarily a stills camera. I wouldn't want to be going more than 4 hours on a live stream with those cameras, especially not if I'm going to use that same camera for my stills, because obviously overheating the sensor, that's where you start to have an impact on image quality. So those would be my thoughts there. But it's the Blackmagic Pocket Design 4K. And given that it's a dedicated camera, like that camera never leaves that spot. It is mounted, it's in a teleprompter, it doesn't go anywhere. So it serves my purpose well for that. But the EM1 Mark II is a great camera to live stream with. Super easy, great quality. Okay. All right. Next one here. Let's see. There it is. From Emmanuel, the only flash I own is the Godox V862, and can I achieve beautiful off-camera flash lighting with that until I get the money to buy a strobe? Emmanuel, absolutely. So there are a few things that you have to understand about lighting. And I would encourage you by saying that the fact that you only have that speed light right now and the fact that you don't have the money for a strobe is actually to your benefit. And make sure you take the time to go back and listen to all of Eli's interview when you download the podcast. What you'll realize is that Eli has gotten to where he is now by being very methodical in his approach. And when I say methodical, yes, putting in the time, putting in the practice, putting in the effort, but also evaluating his results, evaluating his process and the steps that he takes, and learning from that and moving forward. And if you listen closely to the descriptions that he gives, especially in the second half of the interview, you'll realize he is a very detail-oriented photographer. So I would argue that you are in a great spot to take that one light that you have and really use it to learn how to do light. Eric, thank you so much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. What you're not going to be able to do is necessarily overpower the sun in the middle of the day. But, if you want to shoot outside, put your subject in shade. And then with that speed light, you're going to be able to do shots that look actually very similar to what Eli is doing. Okay. So there's always a solution. There's always a way around it. Take advantage of the fact, literally, that you can't buy another light right now and really learn how to light, learn how to do everything that you could possibly do with that light. Because what I don't hear you saying in your question is that in fact, here, I got to bring it back up on the screen. I don't hear you saying that you haven't been able to achieve great light with your speed light. I just hear you asking if it's possible. So what that also indicates is that you haven't tried hard enough yet, right? So you definitely want to work on being able to do the things that you can do, okay? Because you're going to learn. You're simply going to learn. Max out that speed light and then go for the strobe. All right, next up. From Aram, commenting on Eli's comments about, slowing down. A huge issue I have with lighting. If I just slow down, I might get that photo I want to capture. Uh, yeah, and Aram, I would not to put words in Eli's mouth, but to add to what Eli's saying. If you listen and when you go back and you listen to the rest of the interview and you hear him talk about the slowing down thing, listen closely, because what he's also describing is slowing down was the means to be able to pay much more attention to detail, right? When you're doing the kind of photography that you see Eli doing, when you're doing the kind of work that I do, the beauty work, it's all about details. You could have the coolest sunset. You could have the most gorgeous model. You could have the neatest styling. You could even have the most amazing lighting. But if you are not paying attention to the little details, the overall perceived quality of that image just kind of goes right down the tubes. So the real benefit of slowing down is that you are able to pay, you're really more in the moment and you're able to pay more attention to details. So yes, I assure you. And there are a lot of ways to do it, Aram. I mean, number one, uh, the methods that Eli has used, it's really creating a mental awareness in your own mind and developing a discipline, which I give him a lot of credit for because that's something that I myself have struggled with through much of my career. You might notice I'm a little type A, and for me, it is work to slow down and be deliberate. I've been doing it for so many years. At this point, when I pick up a camera, I can do that. It's almost literally, it's almost kind of like a calming feel comes over me. And while my energy level is still up, when I'm in that moment of creating, it's kind of like everything's moving fast around me, but I'm seeing the world in slow motion. It takes a lot of practice. But the other thing, Aaron, that you can do that kind of forces that process for you, and this is why I asked Eli about whether or not he tethers. Tethering forces you to slow down because you're connected to a computer. You've got your nice large image on a computer screen, even if it's a laptop. So that's encouraging you to shoot, stop, and look and analyze and evaluate and then make adjustments and go back and shoot more. So don't underestimate the value of tethering at all. That's another great way to be able to slow things down. Okay. All right. And let's see here. Scrolling on down. From Matt, what lens would you use for a full length shot at a studio? And what do you recommend for lighting full length in terms of angle, strength, etc.? Well, Matt, the challenge here is how big is the studio? That's really going to have a big impact on lens. So, Matt, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that you're still here. And I want you to give me some feedback, number one, about how big is the studio, what length, and then I can tell you what lens. And since you asked about what do I recommend for lighting, tell me what you currently have available, both lights and modifiers. Tell me what you have, and I'll tell you what you should use instead of just going and spending money. Let's see if we can solve the problem without spending money, okay? All right, for Bob's Great TV, another great username. What are your best tips for changing a beauty look without changing the background or the makeup? I know this leaves lenses and angles, but I'm struggling to picture this. Bob, you need to take more of my online classes. I talk about this in a bunch of my online classes, and it's something I even talk about it in a lot of my videos, and I have a video that's all about it. It's called Work the Shot. So one of the easiest things to do is switch to black and white. Literally, it's one of the easiest things to do. So if you go and you look through my images and my beauty shots, you'll notice that frequently the models are actually not wearing a top. In other words, it's bare shoulders, and I've wrapped things around them. So I have my model in the studio wearing a tube top, and then I'm cropping just above the tube top, and I'm wrapping things around them. So frequently, in order to get a different look for me, what I'll do is maybe let's say there's a really distinct hairstyle. So that's a problem because if I show that distinct hairstyle more than once, then it's obviously a similar thing. So if I'm looking for a completely different look, I could do my first shot, maybe vertical, where I see the whole hairstyle. Then the second shot, I can flip the horizontal and I can come in and I can crop right here. Now that I've taken the hairstyle out of the mix, it looks completely different, right? Do keep in mind, if you've done something with the makeup that is obvious, let's say it's clown makeup, well, then you're not going to be able to do variations. You're going for one picture because every picture after the best picture is just another picture. But if you've got a model who basically is wearing pretty makeup, who just looks amazing, and you want to try to get different looks, yeah, you're going to start where you see, maybe a vertical frame where you're seeing all the hair and, head and shoulders. Then you can go to a horizontal frame where you're going to cut off the top of the head. So it's super tight with lots of impact. And at that point, you definitely want your model staring straight down your camera lens. And then maybe you back out a little bit more so that you can put a little bit of space at the bottom, and then take a piece of material or take a piece of vinyl or something and wrap it around the model's shoulders and create just kind of an interesting piece at the bottom of the shot. Still the same makeup, still the same hair. And then the way that I always explain it in my presentations, Bob, when you get to the end and you've run out of things to do, you take the hairstyle, you mess it up, and throw some glitter at it. When in doubt, glitter is amazing. So, but there's always things that you can do to switch it up by adding little extra pieces or taking pieces away and then changing your composition to eliminate elements of the shot that would be obvious. That's my approach. Okay? All right, let's see here from Adam. Great questions tonight, gang. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. When you're working in the studio, and still got a couple minutes, gang. I don't think I've missed any questions, so how can I help you? Adam's asking me, when you're working in the studio, do you use autofocus or do you lock focus and focus manually? Adam, no. No locking focus ever, ever, ever for people. And I never focus manually because my eyes are no longer that good. And honestly, there's no benefit to that. I would debate any photographer who's going to tell me that you're going to do a better job shooting portraits by using manual focus. That just makes no sense. I don't care what camera brand you're working with today. The autofocus in the cameras, and pretty much all the major camera brands now have, eye tracking, autofocus, etc. So, yeah, there's really no reason to not let the camera do what it does, because it's going to do it better than most people are capable of doing. The one big thing you don't want to be doing when you're photographing, portraits or models or people in general, and I still hear people doing it, and it's the most ridiculous thing ever, and that's the whole focus and recompose. Focus and recompose when photographing people. I don't care if they're sitting for a portrait, meaning they're not moving, they're not walking around. It is the dumbest thing ever, folks. Dumb. Like, there is absolutely no sensibility to it whatsoever. Simply because you're human and your subject is human. That means you're both breathing. That means you're both moving. That means even in the fraction of a second from the time that you lock that focus and then recompose, the distance changes. And then the same photographers that do focus and recompose will shoot at f1.8. And then they get frustrated because they can't get everything in focus. It makes no sense. So yeah, I let the cameras do the work for sure. Matt says here, this is about the studio size that he has. I hire a studio, but I don't own one. That's okay. It's a fairly large one. I use my Sigma 56 millimeter comfortably, but not for full length. I saw soft boxes that are 20 by 28, I guess, but not sure if there are others offered. So, okay, I'm going to assume, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong as I keep talking here. I'm going to assume that you're working full frame with that 56 millimeter lens. So what you have to realize that when you're shooting in a studio and when you're shooting full length in a studio, one of the factors that are going to determine your decisions. Philip, thank you so much for the super chat. I'll get your answer in just a second, I promise. One of the factors that are going to determine the decisions that you make, Matt, what are you doing with the background? So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got your subject just on a seamless, solid color background. That means that in the picture, your finished picture, there's no perception of depth because there are no other elements to the shot, right? Your subject could be 3 feet in front of the background or 10 feet in front of the background, but if all you see is that seamless background, there's no real perception of depth. You can add a little bit of perception of depth with light, but not much. Now, the flip side, you're in the studio. If you have a set or props behind your subject, now depth becomes more of a factor because of size relationships, etc. So, in a perfect world, meaning I have enough space, I like to shoot my full length shots with 85 millimeter or a 100 millimeter lens. This is basically full frame measurements. So as an Olympus shooter, okay, so Matt, if you're a micro four thirds shooter, I see there. For me, I work with the 45 millimeter lens in a perfect space. And if you're in a large studio, you'll have plenty of space with that 45. In terms of having a 20 by 28 softbox, and even in terms of lighting full length, part of what you also have to understand is there are other decisions to be made. Meaning, okay, I'm lighting full length. Do I need the feet to be every bit as bright as the face? 99% of the time for photographs I would take, I don't want the feet to be as bright as the face. There's no benefit to that. I don't want them to be in pitch darkness, but I also don't need or want them to be as bright as the face. So I would have no problem working with a 20 by 28 softbox and doing a full length shot with that because I'm going to get a little bit of fall off. Part of the key to that is don't have that 20 by 28 softbox sitting 2 feet from your subject's head. If you do that, you are going to have dramatic light fall off. I'm going to back it up a little bit, allow light to spread. Unfortunately, Matt, the best answers to your question require that you go and you watch my video on the inverse square law. In fact, let me just switch over here, and I will get you the link to it. I will share it in the chat window here, and I would encourage you watch this video. And you may need to watch it more than once. And if you really want to understand it, you're also going to need to practice it, not on a model. Practice it on an egg, on a mannequin, whatever, but you're going to need to practice a little bit to really develop an understanding. But that's another aspect that's going to really have an impact over what's going to work best. But if you're working micro four thirds, 45 millimeter in a larger space, the 20 by 28s are absolutely fine, unless for some reason you need to have your subject evenly lit top to bottom. That would be my approach. Okay. All right. From Mitch Morgan, this may sound silly, but do you have any glitter tips? I only discovered this year there are different thicknesses of glitter. I thought the model who told me was joking. Yeah, I get my glitter. There are different thicknesses. There's tons of different kinds of glitter. You can get really fine glitter. You can get kind of really chunky glitter. Noel, how are you, man? Nice to see you. So the thing with the glitter, Mitch, it really depends on what you want it to look like in the photo. Honestly, I've worked with really, really fine glitter, which you can smooth it out and make it like a coating. I've worked with big chunky glitter that gives me texture and it's much more random. So, in terms of tips, the best tip I can give you is experiment a little bit with some different types of glitter. I find that one of the best sources for glitter for the stuff that I like is actually in an arts and crafts stores. Here in the US, I go to like a Michael's and you can buy it by the jar. And I do have kind of different chunkiness of glitter. But yeah, it's worth it. Matt, thank you so much for the super chat, man. It's worth experimenting with. It really is. And because again, I joke about the idea of throw glitter at it. Trust me, don't just throw glitter at it. It takes a little bit of planning and you want to be really careful. But yeah, you can do really cool things with glitter. Full disclosure so that you guys aren't complaining to me later. The minute you use glitter, it never goes away. Okay. So if you work at home in your house, or even if you have a studio, it's going to wind up in your clothes. It's going to be everywhere, right? It just does. So once you use glitter and use it well, you'll be cleaning up glitter forever. I promise. Okay. Philip had a super chat question here. What tethering system do you use or do you recommend? I love your work. Well, first of all, Philip, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hands down, tether tools all the way. We are starting to see some other brands of tethering gear, and they come out of China. It's no different than, you find Chinese knockoffs of anything that becomes really popular. I'm not opposed to buying things made in China, hence I use Godox lighting, right? But it's got to be good quality. I have yet to find any cabling systems or tether accessories or gear that have the same kind of quality. The Tether Tools cables, they are a little pricey, but that's the best part. You are not going to be replacing them all the time. They are heavily insulated, which is going to give you better data transfer. They're just simply high quality cables all the way. And also, it's a little bit pricey, but I would encourage you, especially if you are going to hand hold your camera while tethering, make sure you purchase a tether block, also from Tether Tools. The tether block, they're about $100, but it is going to lock that cable onto the bottom of your camera, which is going to help having the cable kind of wiggle its way out or stop the cable from wiggling its way out. It's also going to give you a little bit of extra safety in the event that if you are worried about dropping the camera or having the camera fall, you could take the tether cord. So imagine I'm holding the camera. The tether cord is going to come out of this side of my camera. It's going to go through the tether block underneath. And frequently, if I'm hand holding, I'll actually wrap the cord once around my wrist. And so the best part of that, if I were to let go of the camera, the cord's going to tighten on my wrist and the camera doesn't drop to the floor. And because of the tether block, the cord is not pulling on the data port. So it's definitely a worthwhile expenditure. But yeah, you want to go Tether Tools all the way. It's the best that's out there by far. Okay, and they support pretty much every camera. They even have software available depending on what camera brand you're using. As an Olympus guy, I use Olympus Capture because it's the fastest and it's really easy. If you're a Capture One person or even a Lightroom person, you can tether directly into that software with Canon, Nikon, Sony. I wouldn't recommend tethering with Lightroom, but it's possible. But Tether Tools also has the Smart Shooter program and some other softwares available. So depending on what brand you use, there's a bunch of options. Also, their website, if you haven't tethered yet, Philip, it is a gold mine of information, ideas, suggestions, tips, how-tos for tethering. So by all means, start there. I was going to say I have a video that I did about 2 years ago on tethering, but it's actually really, really basic. So by all means, feel free to watch that. But I promise you, the Tether Tools website has tons of excellent information. Okay. Gang, you guys are awesome. You had me a little worried tonight. The questions came in late. Awesome questions, though. Thank you so much. So there will still be a talk chat next week. And I'm going to be recording another interview on Monday, but it's not going to air next week. I have a special topic for you next week that we will do. But I will give you a little tip. So right before New Year's, my guest on Talk Chat is going to be another fellow YouTuber who has stopped in here to Talk Chat from time to time and said hello in the chat, and who I have been wanting to talk to for quite a while, and we've finally gotten our act together to do it, and that is Irene Rudnick. So stay tuned. You'll hear more about that, but I hope to see you guys back again next week. For now, that about wraps things up. Again, also, special thanks to Imaging USA 2021 and the Professional Photographers of America for sponsoring tonight's show. Remember, there's a special link in the show notes. You register now, and you just pay $59, or go ahead and join PPA as a member, and then you get to attend for free. So, gang, thank you for tuning in and for a great night of chatting about all things photography. Don't forget to download the podcast to hear the rest of my interview with Eli Infante. I hope to see you again next Wednesday. And in the meanwhile, stay safe and healthy. And whatever you do, please remember these words. Thanks for watching this episode of Talk Chat. Don't forget to download this week's podcast for even more TOG knowledge. The link is in the show notes. Now go and pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios.